By the end of that day, I was standing in my driveway, holding a set of papers I had never seen before, realizing something I couldn't unlearn. The warning my mom gave me that morning wasn't about safety. It wasn't about concern. And it definitely wasn't about protecting me. It was about giving herself time. That morning had felt ordinary. Coffee still hot in my hand, keys by the door, work on my mind. As I was heading out, my mom stopped me. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't sit me down. She didn't explain anything. She just said, "If you can, don't come back tonight." No reason, no emotion, just that one sentence. I remember pausing, waiting for more, but she turned back to the sink like the conversation was already over. At the time, I told myself she was just being strange, maybe stressed, maybe tired, but by late afternoon, my phone started lighting up in ways it never had before. Missed calls, voicemails I didn't recognize, a message that made my stomach drop. And by evening, I understood exactly what my mom had been trying to avoid saying out loud. What I discovered that day wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no police lights, no slammed doors, just quiet decisions made behind my back, paperwork signed without my knowledge, and a truth that had been forming for years, finally showing itself all at once. Before we go any further, if you value real stories about family trust and the moments when silence finally breaks, take a second to subscribe to this channel. That way, if life pulls you away mid-story, or if you're looking for others like this, later you won't lose them. Let me ask you something. What would you do if the person who warned you first was also the person who knew exactly what was coming? Because what happened next didn't start that morning. It didn't even start that week. It started years earlier, in small moments most people would overlook. And the part that hurt the most wasn't what I lost. It was realizing how long the truth had been sitting right in front of me, waiting for one ordinary day to finally make sense. And that part of the story comes next. Growing up, my family looked normal from the outside. 2 working parents, a decent house, holidays, birthdays, school events, nothing anyone would point at and call broken. But inside that house, everyone had a role, and once your role was set, it didn't change. My role was simple. I was the one who didn't need help. If I did well in school, it was expected. If I handled problems on my own, it was convenient. If I stayed quiet, it kept things running smoothly. My sibling was different. Mistakes were explained away. Outbursts were just stress. Problems became family emergencies. I learned early that effort and attention weren't rewarded the same way. When I got good news, it was acknowledged and then set aside. When someone else had trouble, the whole house shifted to accommodate it. No one ever said it out loud. That's the part people miss. It wasn't cruelty. It was habit. Over time, I stopped bringing things up unless I had to. Not because I was angry, because I was tired of explaining why something mattered. I handled my own paperwork, made my own plans, learned how to be careful with what I shared. And my mom noticed that. She'd say things like, "You've always been independent," or "You don't need much, you're strong." At the time, I took those words as compliments. It took me years to understand they were also permissions. Permission not to be checked on. Permission not to be defended. Permission to be left out of decisions made for the family. My dad was more direct. He believed in order, in keeping things under control. He liked plans. He liked certainty. And he didn't like questions that slowed things down. If something needed to be handled, he handled it. If something needed to be decided, he decided it. My mom's role was different. She smoothed things over, avoided confrontation, kept the peace. If my dad pushed too hard, she softened it. If someone was upset, she tried to calm them down. She wasn't unkind, but she believed that silence solved problems. And when you grow up in a house like that, you learn something very specific. You learn that love doesn't always show up as protection. Sometimes it shows up as avoidance. By the time I was an adult, I had stopped expecting fairness. I just expected consistency. I knew where I stood. I knew what I could rely on, or at least I thought I did. There was one place where things felt different. Not louder, not happier, just steadier. It was a property that had been in the family for years. Not fancy, not impressive, but it was quiet, and it had rules that made sense. When something broke, it got fixed. When something needed care, it received it. I spent time there when I could. Not because I was hiding, because it was the only place where I didn't feel like I had to manage everyone else's emotions. I took care of small things, checked on maintenance, paid attention. No one asked me to. I just did. Over time, my family started talking about that place differently. Not about memories, not about time spent there. About value, what it might be worth, what could be done with it, what we should decide. That's when something shifted for me. Not fear, awareness, because the tone wasn't curious. It was entitled, and the conversations always happened around me, not with me. I noticed my mom listening more than speaking, nodding, changing the subject when things got uncomfortable. I noticed my dad speaking with more certainty, like decisions were already made. And I noticed myself doing what I'd always done, staying quiet, observing, taking mental notes. At the time, I didn't know anything was about to happen. But looking back now, this is where it started. Not with the warning that morning, not with the calls later that day. It started with a family that believed they knew what was best, a pattern that had worked for years, and a silence I had been taught to mistake for safety. That silence would matter more than anyone realized. And soon, it would be tested. That place didn't feel important to my family at first. For years, it was just there. Something no one argued about. Something no one rushed to claim. It wasn't the kind of property people bragged about. No polished floors, no updates meant to impress guests. But it had history. And more importantly, it had structure. Things were done a certain way. Bills were paid on time. Repairs were handled before they became problems. I learned that rhythm without being taught. If a hinge squeaked, I fixed it. If a light flickered, I replaced it. If something needed attention, it got it. Not because I was trying to prove anything. Because that's how you keep things from falling apart. At first, my family didn't notice. They assumed it was just convenience. That I had time. That I didn't mind. And for a while, that was true. But slowly, the conversation started changing. It began casually, comments at dinner, questions that sounded harmless. So how often are you going out there now? Have you thought about what it might be worth? Places like that are selling fast these days. No one asked what it meant to me. No one asked how I felt about it. They talked as if the answer was obvious, as if it already belonged to all of us equally, regardless of who showed up or who took responsibility. My dad talked numbers, taxes, insurance, market value. He liked framing things as being practical. My mom listened. She nodded. She said things like, "Well, we should think ahead." She didn't push back. She didn't ask questions. And I started noticing something else. Whenever the conversation edged too close to specifics, she redirected it, changed the subject, brought up something unrelated, smiled like everything was fine. At the time, I thought she was just trying to keep the peace. I didn't realize she was already carrying information she didn't want to say out loud. As the months passed, visits increased. People showed up unannounced, walked through rooms like they were measuring space. Someone mentioned renovations that hadn't been discussed. Someone else mentioned how easy it would be to sell if everyone agreed. Everyone. That word kept coming up, but no one ever asked me directly. Instead, decisions were spoken about as if they were already settled. I remember standing in the kitchen one afternoon, listening to my dad explain how we could streamline things if paperwork was handled properly. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me, like I was part of the background. That was the moment something clicked. Not anger, clarity. I realized they weren't waiting for my input. They were waiting for my absence. Because silence had always worked before. If I didn't object, they assumed consent. If I didn't ask questions, they filled in the answers themselves. And my mom, she stayed quiet. She avoided eye contact when things got too specific. She focused on small tasks, straightening papers, wiping counters that were already clean. I told myself she would speak up if something was wrong. I wanted to believe that, but there were signs I ignored. She started asking subtle questions. Do you keep copies of your important documents? Do you still use that old email address? You should make sure everything is organized. It sounded like concern. It sounded like advice, but it felt timed. I didn't know why at first. Then one afternoon, I overheard part of a phone call. Not enough to understand the details. Just enough to know it wasn't casual. Her voice was low, controlled. She said my name once, then said, "No, not yet." When she noticed me nearby, she ended the call quickly, smiled, said it was nothing. That night I lay awake longer than usual. Not worried, just alert. Because when you grow up learning to read rooms instead of words, you know when something is being managed. I still didn't know what was coming, but I knew this much. Whatever decisions were being discussed, they weren't happening in the open. And whatever role my mom was playing, it wasn't accidental. Looking back now, this was the stretch of time where everything was being positioned. Paperwork gathered, conversations framed, assumptions solidified, and I was still being treated as the person who wouldn't push back, the one who would understand, the one who wouldn't make things difficult. They were wrong about that, but they didn't know it yet, and by the next morning, the illusion of calm would finally break. That morning started like any other. I woke up early. The house was quiet in that familiar way that makes you think nothing is wrong. Coffee brewed. Keys sat where they always did. I was already halfway through my routine when my mom appeared in the kitchen. She didn't look upset. She didn't look rushed. If anything, she looked careful. She watched me move around for a moment before speaking, like she was deciding whether the timing was right. Then she said it. "If you can, don't come back tonight." No explanation followed. She didn't say it like a warning you give a child. She said it like a suggestion you make when you already know the outcome. I laughed a little at first. Asked her why. She shook her head and turned back to the sink. "Just trust me," she said. "It'll be easier." That word stuck with me. Easier for who? I stood there longer than I meant to, waiting for her to say something else. She didn't. So I grabbed my things and left, telling myself I was overthinking it. On the drive to work, I replayed the moment in my head. Her tone, her posture, the way she avoided my eyes. It wasn't fear. It was restraint. By mid-morning, I had almost convinced myself it was nothing. Then my phone buzzed. A missed call from a number I didn't recognize. I ignored it. 10 minutes later, another call. Then a voicemail notification. I listened to it in the break room, standing by the vending machines. The message was polite, professional. The caller said they were trying to reach me regarding a property matter. Asked me to return the call at my convenience. No urgency, no details. Just enough to unsettle me. A few minutes after that, a text came through. "Please contact us today." That was it. No name, no context. I checked my email. Nothing. I checked my calendar. No appointments. I thought about calling my mom. Then I remembered her face that morning. And I didn't. Around lunchtime, another call came in. This time I answered. The voice on the other end introduced themselves and asked to confirm my identity. They mentioned an address, the place. They asked if I was available to discuss some documentation. I asked what kind of documentation. There was a pause. Then they said they'd prefer to go over it in person. That was when my stomach tightened. I asked who requested the meeting. They hesitated, then gave a name. My father's. I thanked them and said I'd call back. I didn't. Instead, I stepped outside and sat in my car. I tried calling my mom, straight to voicemail. I texted her. No response. That's when the morning finally made sense. She hadn't warned me because she didn't know what was happening. She warned me because she did. The rest of the afternoon moved slowly. Every sound felt louder. Every email felt heavier. By late afternoon, I had a message waiting from a different number. This one was brief. They're there now. No signature. No explanation. I didn't need one. I left work early. As I drove, I thought about all the times I'd been told not to worry. All the times I'd been reassured that things were handled. I pulled onto the road leading to the property just as the sun started to dip. There were cars I didn't recognize. People standing where they shouldn't have been standing, talking like they belonged there. I parked and sat for a moment, hands still on the steering wheel. I thought about my mom at the sink that morning, about how calm she'd been, about how she'd said, "It'll be easier." When I stepped out of the car, no one noticed me at first. They were too busy talking, too busy acting like the decisions had already been made. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. The warning wasn't meant to protect me from what was happening. It was meant to keep me from witnessing it. Because once I saw it for myself, there would be no pretending it was a misunderstanding. No saying things got out of hand. No rewriting the story later. And the truth I was about to face was going to change how I saw my family forever. I stayed in the car longer than I needed to. Not because I was scared, because I wanted to understand what I was walking into. From where I was parked, I could see movement. People going in and out. Doors opening and closing. Someone I didn't recognize was holding a clipboard. Another person was on the phone pacing, like they were waiting for approval. It looked organized, planned, not like a misunderstanding at all. When I finally stepped out, the sound of gravel under my shoes caught someone's attention. A head turned. Then another. There was a brief pause, the kind that happens when a room realizes someone wasn't supposed to be there yet. My dad looked surprised, then annoyed. My mom froze. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She just looked at me the way you look at something fragile you hoped wouldn't break right in front of you. "What are you doing here?" my dad asked. Not concerned, not relieved. I asked him the same question. He gestured vaguely toward the house, toward the people, toward the paperwork. "We're just taking care of things," he said. "It's easier this way." There it was again. Easier. I looked at the clipboard, at the forms clipped neatly together. I asked who those people were. One of them stepped forward and introduced themselves as an agent. Another mentioned a buyer. A buyer. I asked when this had been discussed. My dad answered like the details didn't matter. "It's been in the works," he said. "You don't need to worry about it." I turned to my mom. She didn't meet my eyes. She stared at the ground, then finally said, "I tried to tell you this morning." That sentence hit harder than anything else. Not because it was untrue, but because it was incomplete. She hadn't tried to tell me. She'd tried to delay me. I asked to see the documents. The agent hesitated, then handed them over. They were neatly prepared, official-looking. There were signatures, dates, boxes checked. My name appeared in places I hadn't written it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone. I just pointed to one line and asked a simple question. "When did I sign this?" No one answered right away. My dad said something about authorization, about family decisions, about doing what was best. I asked again. The agent shifted uncomfortably. That's when my mom finally spoke. "Your father thought it would be easier if we handled it." She used that word carefully, like it spread the weight evenly. I looked at her and realized something painful. She wasn't the mastermind. She wasn't the hero either. She was the quiet agreement, the nod that made everything possible. The rest came quickly after that. More questions, more pauses. The agent asked if I wanted to continue. I said no. I said not until everything was reviewed. The agent stepped back. The buyer made an excuse and left. The clipboard went down. The momentum broke. That's when my dad's tone changed. He stopped explaining and started insisting. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. I told him the truth. "It's already hard. I just didn't know yet." My mom finally looked up. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "I warned you," she said quietly. "I didn't want you walking into this." That's when it clicked fully. The warning wasn't about sparing me pain. It was about sparing her guilt. If I wasn't there, she could tell herself she'd tried. She could believe she hadn't been part of it. Standing there surrounded by paperwork and half-made plans, I understood something else, too. This hadn't started with the documents. It started with years of silence, with a belief that I wouldn't push back, that I'd accept decisions made without me, that I'd understand the way I always had. They had mistaken my quiet for permission. And now that I was standing there, reading the fine print with my own eyes, that mistake was impossible to undo, because once you see the truth clearly, you can't be guided away from it. And the next step wasn't emotional. It was practical. What happened next would change the balance completely. Once the buyer left and the agent stepped back, the space felt different, quieter, heavier, like everyone suddenly realized this wasn't going to resolve itself with a few reassuring words. My dad folded his arms and looked at me the way he always did when things weren't going his way. "We don't need to make this into a big deal," he said. "We're family." That phrase had been used my entire life, usually right before a boundary disappeared. I didn't argue with him. I asked one question: "Do you have anything with my actual signature on it?" He didn't answer right away. My mom shifted beside him, hands clasped together, knuckles pale. "There are ways to handle things," she said carefully. "Not everything has to be formal." Formal, another word, meant to soften what was happening. I told them I was going to have everything reviewed before anything moved forward. That's when my dad's patience finally cracked. "You're overreacting," he said. "This is how adults handle property." I looked at him and realized something quietly important. This wasn't about property. It was about control. He was used to deciding, used to moving pieces into place and expecting everyone else to fall in line. And for years I had, not because I agreed, because it was easier. But standing there with my name on documents, I hadn't signed something, had shifted. I wasn't angry. I was resolved. I told them I would be contacting someone to review the paperwork. My dad scoffed. My mom closed her eyes. "You don't need to bring outsiders into this," she said. "It'll only make things worse." That was the moment I finally understood her role fully. She believed avoiding conflict was kindness. She believed silence prevented damage. But silence had allowed this to happen. I made the call that evening, not to confront, not to accuse, just to clarify. What followed wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no ultimatums. Just facts, dates that didn't line up, documents that weren't valid, assumptions that didn't hold up when examined closely. By the end of that process, it was clear. Nothing could move forward the way my parents had planned. Not without my direct involvement. Not without my consent. When I told them that my dad went quiet, my mom finally spoke the truth. "I thought it would be easier this way," she said. "I didn't want anyone to get hurt." I believed her, and that made it worse. Because it meant she'd chosen comfort over honesty, chosen quiet over protection. I didn't cut them off that night. I didn't storm out. I simply stated what would happen next. No decisions without my presence. No paperwork without my review. No assumptions about what I would accept. Those were my boundaries. They weren't emotional. They weren't punishments. They were necessary. The next few days were uncomfortable. Messages went unanswered. Conversations stayed brief. My dad tested the limits. My mom tried to smooth things over again. But something had changed. The pattern no longer worked. By the end of the week, the plans they'd made quietly had unraveled completely. And the truth settled in. The warning my mom gave me that morning wasn't meant to protect me from a bad surprise. It was meant to protect the version of herself that didn't want to feel responsible. But seeing the truth fully and clearly gave me something I'd never had before. Choice. I could decide what role I played going forward. And for the first time, I didn't choose silence. If you step back and look at this story the way a professional would, there's a pattern that's impossible to miss. This wasn't about paperwork. It wasn't even about property. It was about a family that confused silence with consent. In many families, especially ones that value keeping the peace, The quiet person is often assumed to be the flexible one, the one who will understand, the one who won't push back. Over time, that assumption hardens into entitlement. Decisions get made without discussion. Plans move forward without permission. And boundaries are crossed under the belief that love will smooth it over later. What stands out here isn't anger or revenge. It's clarity. Once the truth was visible, the response wasn't emotional. It was structured, measured, grounded. That's what healthy boundaries look like. They don't require shouting. They don't require cutting people off. They require consistency. The hardest lesson for many adults is realizing that family roles only change when behavior changes, not when intentions are explained, not when guilt is expressed, but when limits are clearly set and upheld. If this story resonated with you, it's likely because you've seen some version of it yourself. Maybe you were the quiet one. Maybe you were expected to go along. Maybe you were told things were being handled for your own good. If so, take a moment to reflect on this. Silence doesn't protect relationships. Honesty does. Before you go, if you value stories like this, real grounded experiences that explore family dynamics, trust in the quiet moments when everything finally becomes clear, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. That small action helps ensure you don't miss future stories, especially when life gets busy. And if you're still here, let me leave you with one question. What boundaries would you set if you knew the truth before it was too late? Take care of yourself. And thank you for listening